I want to begin by telling you a story, which you probably heard already, about a man who drove his car off an old country road, and whatever he tried to do, he could not get the car back on the road. This was in the US. And he decided to leave his car there, go to the nearest home he could find, and ask for help. So he went and knocked on the door of the nearest home he could find, and an elderly gentleman came to the door, answered the door, and then listened to him as he explained his plight. Without saying a word, the man walked over to his barn and came out leading a mule, and he announced, "Rusty here will have you back on the road in no time." They walked back to where the car was. The old man hitched Rusty to the car, and then he proceeded to issue some commands. He said, "Pull, Jim, pull." Nothing happened. Then he said, "Pull, Clyde, pull." And again, nothing happened. Finally, he said, "Pull, Rusty, pull." And the mule, with just one move, the mule yanked the car and placed it right back on the road. And the confused driver said, after thanking the old man, he said, "I have a question for you. If he only answers to his own name, why did you have to call all those other names?" To which the old man replied, "Rusty here is blind and he doesn't have much confidence. If he knew he was pulling alone, he would never have done it." That's kind of what is going on right now. This whole time we have thought that there is divine providence behind our achievements. There is God who helps us in the different things that we are doing in this world. But we have come to discover, to realize that we are really on our own. Like Rusty, we are pulling on our own. And the quicker we wake up to this reality, the better we are all going to be. That's a story that's floating out there. And like I said, is attractive to many people these days. But I'm going to argue that way of thinking about our world is gravely mistaken on very many levels. It's mistaken on many levels. First of all, if you think about just thinking about the universe, when we are being told that belief in God or faith in God is dangerous, that it needs to be eradicated, just think about whether it is possible for us to understand our world today without religion. It is not possible. You cannot understand, for example, South America without Catholicism, or what is going on right now in the Middle East. It's not possible to understand our world without religion. So pragmatically, it's an empty cry to say that religion needs to be eradicated. That's one problem. The second problem is this. Religion is actually increasing. It is not decreasing. There are many more people coming to Christ in our day and joining other religions as well. So it's not decreasing. So to say that we need to eradicate it is just wishful thinking. It is not going to happen because we see lots and lots of people coming to Christ in our day. I've read a story about an essay called "The Candle and the Bird," written by a man named F.W. Borum. And this is what he says, that the gospel is more like a bird than it is a candle. This is what he means. If a bird is singing its song on one tree and you frighten it, it doesn't stop singing its song. It just goes to another place and continues singing its song. But when you blow out the light of a candle, it is gone forever. And he says this, the gospel is more like a bird than the candle, because when it is decreasing in one area, as it is doing in the West, sadly, today, it's increasing in other parts of the world. Who would have ever thought that in our day, the fastest growing church would be in China? And yet that's what's going on right now, and also in the so-called global South. So the gospel is not decreasing, it's increasing. So that way of thinking, such uncharitable way of thinking is really misguided on many, many levels. But these people tell us that they are really basing their arguments or their reasoning on logic. That if you are really educated, or if you really understand how the world functions and all that, you are not going to be a believer. You're bound to believe, to accept the view that God doesn't exist. Now, I cannot think of a statement that is more demonstrably false than that one, because there are gifted minds on either side of this question. Take, for example, an example that I gave you before when I was here. James Watson, who was the head of the Human Genome Project and an avowed atheist, And yet the guy who succeeded him, Francis Collins, is a committed believer. And these examples could be multiplied endlessly. So the issue that we are hearing that God needs to be eradicated and all that is simply wishful thinking. But let me tell you, I'll take the rest of the time and tell you why I think there are even stronger reasons why that way of thinking about our world is really so mistaken. And I'm just going to speak 3 areas of our lives that we cannot make sense of without God, if God doesn't exist. We cannot make sense of these 3 areas in our lives without appealing to God. I could pick a lot more, but I'll just pick these 3 because of time. And the number 1 area is the area of the question of the meaning and purpose of our existence, the meaning and purpose of our lives. We cannot make sense of the meaning and purpose of our lives in this world if God doesn't exist. The question of meaning and the purpose of life is the most important issue that we face when we think about the things that we do, the things that we accomplish, and then we come to grips with the fact that all those things will one day amount to nothing. They will all come to an end. Now, many people get very confused when we talk about this question of the meaning of life. There's a lot of confusion about it, and I want to make sure that we don't make that mistake, because people will tell you that I have so many things in my life that I find pleasure in, or that I find satisfaction in, and that's meaning for me. People will tell you that. But that is to misunderstand what the question of the meaning and the purpose of life really is about. Because when Socrates said a long time ago that the unexamined life is not worth living, he wasn't saying that there's nothing that we find pleasurable or satisfactory in this world. Many of us have many things we can point to that we find pleasurable. But here is the point. Just because you find pleasure and satisfaction in something, it doesn't follow that it is meaningful. You can find pleasure and satisfaction in things that are nevertheless meaningless. That is the problem. Let me give you an example. When I was going to seminary in California, I would go to this public library to study, a very nice public library with a park behind it where many people and their kids would come and play over there at the park. There was this one gentleman who never missed a day. He was very well dressed, like I am today, and he would come, I am very well dressed today, right? He would come to the park with a tennis ball, and this is what he did. He would try to balance a tennis ball on his index finger. It would roll away. He would walk over there and pick it up, come back to the same spot every day, do it the whole thing again. Put the tennis ball on his finger. It would roll away. He would go over and pick it up. He would do this for hours on end. Now, all rational people, or all people, everybody who is psychologically healthy, and if you don't mind, I'll put you in that category tonight. Anybody who is psychologically healthy would say that that kind of an activity is meaningless, although this man really enjoyed it. He enjoyed doing what he was doing. But that's an activity that is meaningless, although it gave him a lot of pleasure and satisfaction. You can find pleasure and satisfaction in activities that are meaningless. But here's the flip side of that. You can do a meaningful activity without finding any pleasure and satisfaction in that activity itself. This is the case, for example, with people who have disabled relatives or ill relatives that they have to take care of day in, day out. That's a meaningful activity, and yet it is not necessarily enjoyable. You would wish your loved one was not in that condition. So you can do things that are meaningful without finding any pleasure in them, in the activity itself, but you do it because it is meaningful. When we ask whether or not life has meaning, what we are looking for is this. Do the things we do, the things that we accomplish in this world as human beings, do those things amount to anything in the end, or does everything amount to a big fat zero when all is said and done? And I'm saying this, if God doesn't exist, nothing we do in this world matters in the end. Everything in the end amounts to nothing. The French existentialist, his name was Albert Camus, said this, that the greatest question in philosophy is this question of the meaning and the purpose of life. He said, everything else about our existence in this world, all the questions we study in philosophy, pale into insignificance when compared with this issue of the meaning and purpose of life. And let me tell you, this is not just an academic discussion that we are having here. This issue of the meaning and the purpose of life is one that many people have reflected on. They have come to the conclusion that life is not worth living, and they have chosen to end it all. I have personally counseled people, talked to people who told me the only reason they have continued to live in this world is because of the fear of the unknown. That if they knew that when they die, their life really does come to an end, they would just take their life. I had somebody say that to me in a counseling session. So this is not a joke. It's a very serious issue. I read a statistic recently that I'm still having a hard time wrapping around my mind, because the statistic was this: that the United States of America loses over 400 doctors, medical doctors, every year to suicide. We all think about the life that doctors live and how privileged they are and they have everything they need. That's what it looks like from our perspective. And yet they achieve it. They get to what they are looking for, and it lets them down. And the loneliest moment in life, as Ravi likes to say, is when you have achieved what you thought would deliver the ultimate in your life, and it lets you down. This question of the meaning and purpose in life, it doesn't come just when we are suffering, when we have pain and suffering and all that. It also comes when we have achieved what we were looking for. Because you and I are finite creatures created for a relationship with an infinite being, and no finite substitutes can ever meet our deepest needs. We are finite creatures created for a relationship with an infinite being, and no finite substitutes can ever meet our deepest needs. Trying to meet our needs in this world, with anything in this world apart from God, is like trying to quench your thirst by drinking salty water. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. Without God, life in this world is meaningless. Number 2 is a question of morality, or right and wrong. Morality, or right and wrong. If God doesn't exist, there is no such thing as objective right and wrong, objective morality. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is this: there are things that are right regardless of what everybody says. If something is right, we could all come to the conclusion that it is wrong, but it would still be right. What is right or what is wrong do not depend on any conclusions human beings make. We find ourselves in a universe that comes packaged with right and wrong, with rules of behavior that we did not invent. We discover these rules. That's what morality is. That's what right and wrong is. And you tell me, if we exist in a universe that already comes packaged with right and wrong, already built in, how in the world can we explain that if this universe was not put together by a moral being, by God? If it was put together by God, who made you and me in his image, then it becomes much, much easier for us to understand what morality is all about, what right and wrong are all about. This is the topic I've been studying for a while now. I could spend the rest of the evening and up to tomorrow just speaking about this topic. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to spare you that tonight, maybe during the Q&A. We can discuss it. But if you get rid of God, you are not going to have objective right and wrong. And this is something about morality that most people don't think about. Morality carries within it the idea or the concept of duty. That you have responsibilities in this world, things you should not do and things that you should do. It comes with, we find ourselves in a world that has duties built into it. How is it possible that we can be held accountable, that we can be rightfully punished for neglecting things that we're supposed to have done? How is that possible if we are not here by God's design, if we're not put here by the living God? Life, right now we still haven't looked at what the Bible has to say. We're just looking at life as we experience it. And we see if God doesn't exist, there is no such thing as right and wrong. And number 3 is this: the intrinsic value of human life. The intrinsic value of human life. We all love to talk about human rights all over the world these days. That's a big deal, speaking about human rights. Everybody wants to fight for human rights. Do you know where that concept came from, of human rights all over the world? It came about as a result of the Judeo-Christian belief that human beings were created in the image of God. That's how it all came about. Now, in many places that I go to speak, I usually go by myself. But today I'm privileged to have my wife here and our 2 boys as well, and a few other friends, and Christian and Rod and Mary and some friends here with me. But our 2 boys here, and Njoroge too, right? Our 2 boys here were born in Los Angeles around the same time that the children of a famous celebrity were born. At the hospital where these celebrities' kids were born, there were all kinds of people waiting to take pictures of the paparazzi waiting to take pictures of these kids. But at the hospital where they were born, my boys were born, nobody showed up with a camera except me. Although, as you can see, they are much better looking. We do not come into this world equal in any sense of the term. The reason the world came to believe that we are all equal as human beings, we may be different colors with different gifts, different talents and all that. The reason we came to believe that we are all equal, even if you are disabled and you cannot even be able to speak or move, because you are human, you are as valuable as anyone else. The reason we came to believe that is because of the Judeo-Christian teaching that we were all made in the image of God. You take that away, and there is nothing that unites us as human beings. You take God away, and everything becomes permissible, as Dostoevsky said. If God doesn't exist, it's a dream that we have, it's a nightmare that we live when we think that we are important, we are valuable as human beings because we just developed by accident in this world. And there's no difference between a human being and a swarm of mosquitoes, no difference at all. But if God exists, and if we are made in his image, as the scriptures tell us, then we have the intrinsic value as human beings, and we ought not to violate each other, because every human being is valuable and important in this world. But if God doesn't exist, there is no way to account for that. Now, we are normally asked this question over and over again, so I'm going to answer it before you ask me. And the question is this. Have you looked at all the worldviews, atheism, Christianity, Hinduism, and all these other views that you haven't even heard of? Have you looked at all of them and have you come to the conclusion that they are all wrong? Is it not possible that you have missed something in your search? Is that not possible? Now, that sounds like a daunting question, but the answer to it is really not that difficult. And please, I'll ask you to please hear me here. Pay attention to what I'm going to say, because I think it's really, really important in terms of looking at all these ways of looking at the world. All the worldviews in existence can be grouped under 3 categories, depending on what they say about God and the universe. Depending on what a worldview says about, or a religion says about God and the universe, it falls in one of 3 categories. On the one extreme, you have the view that only the universe exists. God doesn't exist. Only the universe exists. Of course, there you have atheism, naturalism, and all that. Matter plus time plus space and all that exhausts reality. That's it. That's all we have. Only the physical universe exists, and energy and interaction among the particles and all that. On the other extreme, you have the view, believe it or not, that only God exists. The universe doesn't exist, only God exists. Now you ask me, what about all the different things that I see? The people, the trees, the cars, and all this. What about all these things? And what they tell you is this. If you can learn how to meditate properly, you'll be able to see that everything in the end is all one inclusive whole, if you can learn how to meditate. And so you find this view, for example, in Hinduism, Buddhism, many of these Eastern views. So there are many, many people who hold to that position. Only the universe exists, only God exists. In the middle, you have the view. We'll get over this in a few seconds, so if I just keep paying attention for a few more seconds. In the middle, you have the view that both God and the universe exist. God is eternal and uncaused, and the universe was created by God. And under that, you only have Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, or to put them in a chronological order, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That's all you have. So it's not difficult to evaluate all these views without being an expert in all of them. You just need to know what they say about God and what they say about the universe, and then you can critique them from a broadly logical perspective without having to be an expert in all of them. Now, we don't have the time to answer the question why this view that only the universe exists is so mistaken. It's wrong. It's mistaken on many levels, and maybe that will come up during the Q&A. And we can look at the universe, for example, give you a very simple example. The universe, what scientists are telling us today, is that the universe we inhabit has not always existed. It came into existence a finite time ago by what process they call the Big Bang. That time, space, energy, matter, all those things came into existence a finite time ago. They have not always existed. And they tell us that it came into existence from nothing. Now, out of nothing, nothing comes. So we have to ask the question, where in the world did the universe come from? One of the most confirmed laws of thought, logic and all that, is that if you begin with nothing, you end up with nothing. Out of nothing, nothing comes. But if you have a God who created the universe, you already have an answer to the question of the origin of the universe. And we can develop that during the Q&A. What about this view that only God exists, the universe doesn't exist? The problems with this view, I believe, are many. There are many problems with this view. I had a friend who was very committed to this way of thinking, although he was also from Africa, in the US. And he said this to me: if you can learn how to meditate, you'll be able to see that you don't exist, that only God exists, you don't exist. So I said, have you been able to do this yourself? And he said to me, yes, I do it all the time. And I said to him, I asked him this question: if it is true that when you learn how to meditate and you achieve what you're looking for in your meditation, you get to the point where you don't exist, how in the world can you come back and tell me anything about what you saw when you went there in the first place? And in order for you to deny your own existence, you have to exist. You have to be there to say, I don't exist. This view has way too many problems. We're not going to develop that right now. So let me tell you why it is, and I finish with this. Why is it that I think that the gospel of Jesus Christ makes sense of our existence in our world in a way that nothing else ever will? And I'm just going to pick just a few other things as well that we're going to look at right now. And number one, when we look at the life of Jesus Christ and his teachings, we see that they match our experience in this world so perfectly. For example, Jesus said this, that the real problem, the real issue with us as human beings is that we have rebelled against God, that we are sinful human beings. We have rebelled against God. So that's his diagnosis of the human condition, is my first point. His diagnosis of the human condition. According to the view that only God exists, what they tell us is this: our real problem is ignorance, and what we need is enlightenment. If you're enlightened, you can be able to see reality as it really is. Jesus said our problem is sin. According to this view that only the universe exists, they don't even have a way to frame the question about what's wrong with us, let alone answer it. But we prove Jesus right every waking moment of our day. Let me give you an example. I was invited to speak at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. They were having an event during the National Day of Prayer. The very first event they ever had on that campus. It's a very heavily protected campus in Atlanta. So when I was invited to speak there, they sent me some forms to fill out because I wasn't a U.S. citizen. They asked me when I was born. They asked me where I was born. They almost asked me why I was born. So finally, I filled out that form, sent it in, they looked at it, and they approved it. On the day that I was going to speak there, when I got to the gate, they showed me, they told me to get out of my car, and they checked everything in the car, under the car, the visor, they took out the mats, the engine, everything. They checked everything. Then they said, put your car over here. So I parked it there. And then they said to me, you have to go in through that door. So going in through that door was like going through the airport once again. And they give you a badge. They tell you you cannot go to any room by yourself. There has to be somebody from the CDC to go with you every place you go. Even, believe it or not, even to the bathroom, somebody stands outside waiting for you. So you know what was so ironic about all this? When I got up to speak before all these people, I almost started laughing because I was there to convince them that human beings are sinful. Do you get it? Why would they go to all that trouble if they don't already believe that we as human beings are sinful? We know exactly what we are like. We just keep making excuses for ourselves, and we find ways of dealing with each other because we can't really trust ourselves. Our parents and teachers spend the first few years of our lives teaching us how to say and write our names, and then we spend the rest of our lives traveling around with photo IDs to prove that the names we call ourselves are really our names, right? Then we invent superb machines like computers, and then we have to invent sophisticated software to keep them safe from viruses, many of which we ourselves create. We know exactly what we are like as human beings. And we know exactly what to do. Our problem is not ignorance. We know what to do. We just keep choosing to do the opposite. We prove the Bible right over and over again that we are sinful human beings, and we all know it. D.L. Moody said this, that if a man is stealing nuts and bolts along the railway line, and you take him to college and educate him, by the end of his college education, he'll be able to steal the whole railway line. Our problem is not ignorance. We know what we're supposed to do. We just choose to do the opposite. We prove Jesus right over and over again. But he didn't just diagnose the problem. He also offered a solution. And the solution was this. He paid with his life on the cross for you and for me. And by doing that, he satisfied God's justice and God's love at the same time. He met that condition and reunited us with God by his sacrificial death on the cross. And number 3, his influence around this world. Jesus' life has made a difference in the world in a way that nothing else ever has. These are not my words, but the words of many historians who look at this issue objectively. For example, H.E.W. Leckie, who was not a believer, he said that those short 3 years of active life that Jesus lived in this world made such a difference to the world that nothing philosophers, if you put all the philosophers who have ever lived together, there is nothing they have ever done that can match what Jesus accomplished for this world. And he still changes lives to this day. And let me give you an example. I did not grow up in a Christian home myself. And the only people I knew who were Christians were some neighbors somewhere. I wouldn't mention where because they might be listening, or I might meet them along the way because I grew up here. If it was in the U.S., I'd probably mention it, but I'm here now. These women, the women wore long dresses and they covered their heads, and they would not go to the hospital. They never took their kids to the hospital, and they called themselves born again. And the women would die in childbirth, and the kids would die of easily treatable diseases. And the last thing we wanted as a family and my friends and all that was to be identified with anybody who claimed to be born again. I didn't know what that meant. I thought it meant being like one of these people. But when I became a believer, when I became a follower of Jesus Christ, I shared the gospel with anybody who would listen to me. Anybody who would listen to me. And I remember speaking to a friend of mine when we were at home just relaxing, and I shared the gospel with him. We were very close friends. And he said this to me. I'll never forget his words. He said this to me. I have decided that I'm going to try everything in this world that will make me happy. Everything that will make me happy. And he said, I don't care about what you're telling me right now. So I left, went to the U.S. When I came back. I was in the U.S. for almost 10 years without coming back. My wife and our older son came back after 10 years. And when this friend of mine heard that I was in the country, he sent my sister. And he said to my sister, go tell John that he needs to come see me, and he has to come today. He cannot come tomorrow. And so my wife and our son, who was 2.5 years old, we went to this friend's home. When we got there, he was living in a very small house. There was no electricity. His wife was at the corner cooking, and they served us dinner, which was, believe it or not, just 3 potatoes for the 3 of us. That's all we were served that evening. And he said to me, he didn't even ask me where I was, what I was doing, what has happened in my life all these years. He said to me, I remember telling you that I was going to try everything that would make me happy. And he said, I have done it. I have tried it. I have tried everything that I thought would make me happy, and this is what my life has come to. He said, you used to tell me about Jesus, and I want to try Jesus today. I've never tried that before. So I said to him, you know exactly what you need to do. The same thing you are telling me, you need to say the same thing to God. So he and I knelt on the kitchen floor, his kitchen floor, and he gave his life to Christ. When we were walking home, I said to my wife, that's kind of strange. There was such urgency in his voice. He didn't even ask me about myself. All he wanted to do was give his life to Christ. I said, I'm not sure what's going on here. A couple of months later, we found out why that was happening in his life. God was in hot pursuit of him because he moved his family from that area to a different place where he could get away from all the influences. And you know what happened? He was attacked one evening and killed just a couple of months later. But God was pursuing him. The influence of Jesus in this world still lives on. He still continues to change lives, and he goes to great lengths to find his own. It's a living reality that anybody can experience, not just arguments from philosophy or from science or from logic and all that, but it's a living reality that any of us is able to experience. His diagnosis, his solution, and the influence that he has had in this world is undeniable. And you look at almost any worldview, anybody you meet, we all have some form of respect for Jesus. We all have some form of respect for Jesus. Doesn't matter what religion you follow. The problem is this: we want him on our own terms. And that's where the problems begin. We either come to him as he wants us to come to him, or we insist on meeting him on our own terms, and we end up in trouble. For example, the Hindu recognizes him as a guru, and the New Ager wants him as an ascended master. The secular humanist admires him as a great moral teacher, and even the Muslim admires him as one of the greatest prophets of Allah. The oppressed of the world identify with his suffering and pain. Like an immensely gifted athlete with some eccentric personality quirkiness, it seems Jesus will be welcomed into any team, provided the coaches retain some measure of confidence that they can tame him. We insist on meeting Jesus on our own terms, and our ideas of who he is invariably take the shape of our most cherished images. Like the proverbial queen in Snow White, we say, mirror, mirror on the wall, which Jesus is fairest of them all? And the only answer we want to accept is the one that best suits our fancies. But in spite of our audacious attempts to craft a custom-made God out of the story of Jesus, the Jesus of the Bible stands in complete command of himself and of us. And when all is said and done, when the dust settles, it is the eternally incarnate Son of God who lies behind that hauntingly inescapable question, who do you say that I am? It's a question that we all answer on a daily basis with our words and with our lives. There is no neutral ground. But how wonderful it is when that curtain is pulled back and we are able to see God for who he really is. Then we see ourselves for who we are. And with Joshua, we say this: as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Unlike Rusty, we really are not pulling alone. We were here because we were put here by God for a purpose. We are not alone. We are not pulling alone. And I, for one, am truly, truly glad that God isn't going away. He is our only hope. God bless you so much.
We go into a second session today, which is the question and answer session. At some point, we will take a break to have one question which shall be responded to by the atheistic worldview and then shall be responded to by John. But that's just one question. Most of all the other questions shall be directed to John, and John shall answer them.
So you've said that it is impossible to understand some things without religion. I agree with you, like the politics of Israel, the Middle East and all that. That doesn't make religion right, but it makes us understand all the histories of what has happened in what people have been made from religion, and that's when we can make progress. That doesn't make religion right. But when you refer to James Watson and Francis Collins, I think you said that they were logical, but I think they're only logical in the fields that we recognize them for. You referring to them in the concepts of religion, I think I disagree unless you can really clarify that. Then you also say that there are areas that cannot make sense without God. And I think this is the best case ever for atheism, because like the areas of meaning and purpose for life, I think you said that an examined life is, you referred to someone that an examined life is not is worth living, yeah? But what I would like to say is this, meaning of life is very subjective. It's what we give. You're giving the assumption that the meaning to life is objective, and I would really want you to clarify how you came to the conclusion that life has an objective meaning. And then the second one was that there is objective right and wrong. I think this is something that we've discussed for a long time, and we agreed to disagree. And on the third one, the intrinsic value of human life, if for sure that there is an intrinsic value of human life, and you gave the example of the way we are standing for human rights, then why is it that the religion you stand for, the Judeo-Christian religion, is the one that gives a lot of discrimination, like for homosexuals? Why do we still have the murders, the rape, and all the cases we hear? That means that really the actions, the human actions, are only because of our relationships, but not because there is an intrinsic value of human life. And even if you're going to say because we have sinned as human beings, then why aren't we immortal, since it's God who gives us life? And if you consider it as an of intrinsic value, why aren't we immortal? And
I should be taking notes, right? Are you done?
I will stop.
Okay. Okay, now do this for everybody's benefit. Ask questions one after the other.
The question of that was on can we understand? We cannot understand the world without religion. Number two was on the areas that cannot make sense without God.
The first question about being our ability to we cannot be able to understand the world without religion. That doesn't make religion right. That's something like that. My claim, if you remember correctly, was this: that there have always been people who have been prepared to say God doesn't exist, they're atheists and all that. That's fine. The twist that's being put in this group being called the new atheists is they want to say that we need to eradicate religion, get rid of it. And I said that's a naive way of looking at the world, because we cannot understand our world without religion, whether or not it's right. You are right, that doesn't mean it's right, but it's there. It's a fact. It's a reality that we are living with, and we can't understand our world without it. So to say those kinds of things is totally misguided. What about my example with James Watson and Francis Collins and all that? You say that these people are very smart in their disciplines, intelligent in their disciplines, but not when it comes to this issue of God. Do we have examples of people who have studied religion, who are very smart and all that, and they are religious? And the answer, we can all answer together? Yes, there are many people who have any type of degree you can name in philosophy, in logic, in religion, in whatever you want to name. If you set those aside because they are scientists, and then you look at people who are religious, then you have already said to yourself, you have already fallen into the trap, because you are saying that what you would have to say is this: that there is nobody who is intelligent or who is smart, who has studied religion, that is religious today. And that's a very difficult claim to sustain. And so that's something, I think that's demonstrable force. That's not difficult to deal with. What about these other issues that I mentioned about meaning and purpose in life? For example, the intrinsic value of human life. You asked why it is that if Christianity or the Judeo-Christian tradition, if it respects human life so much, and we have this claim, we make this claim that we were all made in the image of God, how come we have discrimination, things that discriminate against people? And you mentioned homosexuality and all that. That's a very good question, but what you're doing there, Brenda, is you're mixing categories. And what you're doing is this. When you talk about discriminating against homosexuals, you are giving a caricature of what the Bible teaches about sexuality. From the biblical standpoint, sexuality is sacred before God. You are not discriminating against the person. You are being given a context in which sexuality is to be expressed, and that is within marriage, husband and wife. If you have people, and I'm sure we have people like that here, who are single, and they are Christians, and they would want to get married, but it just has not happened to them. Those people face the same hurdle when it comes to the expression of their sexuality. If you get married and you are Christian, and for some reason you cannot be able to consummate that relationship, you are still stuck in the same situation, in the same condition. You are still limited as to what you can do with your sexuality. So it's the issue of sexuality in the scriptures. It is not a discrimination against a person. Every human being, from a biblical standpoint, is important. And we see Jesus teaching, for example, the story of the Good Samaritan, which we all use today and speak to today, while ignoring the context. The Bible, pick any place you will find in the teachings of Jesus, you are not going to find any place where any human being is excluded by God. And when you see, for example, the value that the Bible places on the role of women, and you understand what was going on in those cultures at the time, you find out that a woman could not stand in court. If she witnessed a crime, she could not stand in court and give her testimony because she was not believed. Her testimony was not taken seriously. But in the Bible, you find out that the authors of the Gospels report that it was women who discovered the empty tomb. They are given that honor, and we have the Messiah also coming into this world through a woman. He could have come in any way, but he chose to come through a woman. The role given, the honor given to women in the Bible is so powerful, especially when you consider how countercultural it was during those days. What about the issue of meaning and purpose in life in this world? I would welcome a response. Maybe somebody can explain how you account for that as an atheist. But you ask the question, how did I come to the conclusion that there is objective meaning and purpose in life? That was the question. I have not given arguments right now arguing that God exists and all that. My claim was this: if there really is a God who is eternal and who made us in his image, then we have purpose, we have meaning in this life. You see this ring here. We consider such things to be valuable, and they're just rocks. They're just rocks that are like other rocks in the world, and yet we place, and yet they're important. We sell them in our stores and we display them and all that. Why? Because somebody is willing to pay money for them. Somebody values them. And it's the same thing. God values you and me. And if it is true, and I think this should not be debatable, if it is true that we were made in the image of God, and God is eternal, uncaused, and all that, all the superlatives that are put there, not just by believers, by the way, but that's what the word God means. If that is true, and he made us in his image, then it follows that we are valuable human beings. That was my point. It wasn't to try and demonstrate that God exists. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay.
Beverly, I'd like to find out from you, how do you explain the concept of Holy Communion to people who don't believe because you're talking of eating of my flesh and of my blood,
Yeah.
it sounds out, weird, so to speak.
Yeah.
So how can you explain that to someone? Because that's the basis of our belief for Christians.
Yeah.
The second question is, it seems increasingly when you subscribe to religion, you subtract the aspect of reasoning. Most of the time you find that, especially when it comes to issues of rights, still I want to touch on the issue of people of different sexual orientation, where we split hairs and say that God loves them but not the act of homosexuality, which doesn't make sense. How can you say that you accept a person but you don't accept them in their entirety? So it becomes very difficult to embrace even people who are of different orientation, because essentially they're being told...
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Do you have any children?
No, I don't have.
Do you have nieces and nephews? And all
Yes,
that?
I do.
Are they perfect? They
They're
never make mistakes? Do they make mistakes?
They do make mistakes.
Do you accept them?
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay, that answers your question.
Oh. But the thing is, when it comes to the point of where, for example, they can't be allowed to be part of the communion, the fellowship, they're not allowed to be part, of activities within a fellowship. So you find, essentially you're telling them, you can be what you want to be, but you're not welcome to be part of us.
So the second question about God loving somebody and hating something they do, that's our experience as well. So that's I think that's answered already. What about this issue of discrimination that you're talking about? I think I answered that with the previous question that was asked over here. That the issue is not the person; it is the role of sexuality, what that is supposed to be, and what God made it for, what created it for. We may find it very, very difficult for us to control those urges and all that, but what Christianity gives you is the role, the proper role for it. So the issue is the practice itself. It is not the person. And I see the distinction myself, because we do make the distinction when we're dealing with each other. You have maybe your best friend or your nieces or nephews. They will make mistakes, but you still accept them. And there is nobody who is denied fellowship in a Christian setting just because they have those feelings. However you account for them, there's nobody who's denied those kinds of the kind of fellowship you're speaking about, or to be even more explicit, denied salvation because of those proclivities. We are all given equal chance to respond to the call given to us as human beings for salvation through Jesus Christ. That's offered to every human being. It's not offered to any specific person. But at the same time, the God who made us would know how best we are supposed to function as human beings. And if you look at even other religions and other worldviews and all that, you still have to face the same questions. But there is no other worldview that affirms the dignity of each and every human being, whether or not you're able to function or to do anything. There is no other worldview that affirms the dignity of every human being the way the Judeo-Christian worldview does. And if there's an aspect I miss in your question, please feel free to go ahead and comment on it.
The aspect of, ask the first question on how do you explain
the
aspects of Christianity that if you explain to a person who has not grown up in a Christian setup,
Communion.
it comes across as
with the
weird.
communion, okay.
Even the question of resurrection, how do you explain that to a person, that based on a person's resurrection, then come and believe in this person?
Okay, good. Okay, there was communion, and then there's explaining the resurrection and all that.
Yes.
Now, as far as communion goes, yes, those words do sound weird. You eating Jesus' flesh and drinking his blood and all that. It sounds cannibalistic. It sounds really bad. And even those who heard them the very first time say the same thing. They actually walked away from Jesus because of saying such things. But many times, Jesus said things in a way that made them completely memorable to us. We remember them really well because of the way they were stated. And you have to remember what Jesus did on the cross was that he gave his body to be tortured, as much as it was, and then his blood was shed on our behalf, as the Bible says. So when he instituted the communion, and he told people to do that, obviously he was the one who was giving it to them. So it wasn't his body on the table. He was giving it to them. So he must, what he meant wasn't that they literally had to take pieces of his body and eat his body. Those were just symbols. The bread and the wine are symbols of what Jesus did to pay for our sin before God. Now you ask the question about the resurrection and how can the death of one person be able to cover all these the sins of all these people and all that. That's a really good question, and it's one that troubled me for a long time, and I was trying to try and make sense of what exactly happened at the cross. But philosophers tell us, the people who study these things tell us, that there are actually 3 types of laws in this universe, 3 types of laws. The first type of law is man-made. It's a man-made law. Laws that we put together. For example, which side of the road to drive on. In the US, we drive on the right side. Here you drive on the left side. In India, they drive on either side of the road. Those are man-made laws, and they change. We can change them. Now, so man-made laws change. The second type of law is the so-called laws of nature. These are God-made laws. They don't change, but they could change. Gravity could have had a different value, and it has different values in different places. So those ones can change, the laws of nature and all that. The other types are laws, the third type, laws that are based on God's nature. These are laws based on God's nature, and those are immutable. They can never be changed. For example, you have the laws of mathematics, the laws of morality, and you have the laws of logic and all that. These are based on God's nature, and they can never be changed. They will never be changed. So some people will ask the question this way. If I make a mistake, if I'm caught, if I say I run a red light or I make some mistake while driving, and I'm taken to court, the judge can choose to set me free. The judge can choose to do that. Why can't God, who is more merciful, choose to set me free through my sin, in spite of my sin and all that? Here's the difference. When the judge decides to set you free, when a human judge does that, he has to ignore justice at that point. He cannot both honor justice and send you away at the same time. So for God to be able to honor justice, to honor the law of justice that is immutable, to honor that, and at the same time let a sinner go free, something had to be done, and that was the necessity of the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ on the cross. So the analogy should be different. It's not that of the judge setting somebody free. The analogy is very different. The analogy is this. Somebody fires a gun at you, and Nelly sitting right there jumps right in front of you and takes the bullet on your behalf. The bullet is going to connect. It's either going to connect with you or connect with Nelly. And that's what happened on the cross. We stand condemned before God. The bullet is going to connect. It's either going to connect eventually with me or connect through Jesus. And I'm glad it connected through Jesus, that he solved that problem and honored God's justice and God's love at the same time. This is the most beautiful message, I think, that we can ever hear as human beings. And I am convinced it is true, and so are many, many other people.
My last question is, can somebody be good without God? Because hanging up on what you're saying, those standards are set by God. So if I don't believe in that God, then the whole gospel is inapplicable to me.
Yeah.
So the issue of Jesus taking bullet for me doesn't apply to me because I don't believe in that set of standards. Yeah.
Okay, let me take the last part of your question first. You said it doesn't apply to you because you don't fall to that set of standard. Yes. Here's why that's really the wrong way of saying it. What you should say, it doesn't apply to me because I don't think it is true. But just because you don't hold to that standard, it doesn't change the standard. If it is true that Jesus' death on the cross is the hope of salvation for each and every human being this side of the grave. If that is true, even if you don't hold to that standard, it really makes no difference at all. That's why I said this is the most important question that we can answer as human beings. What matters is whether or not it is true. And if it is true, it really doesn't matter whether you hold to it or whether you accept it or don't accept it. That doesn't change anything. It's like, I remember a little boy, I won't tell you who it was, who used to, he really believed this, that if he closed his eyes, the whole room went dark. So he would close his eyes, put his finger in his mouth, then dip it in the bowl of sugar, and then put it back in his mouth and open his eyes, only to see that his mom was ready to do something about it. Because just because he closed his eyes, it doesn't change the fact that other people can still see. What reality is doesn't change because we are denying it, all right? So that's really the wrong way. The issue is whether or not it is true. That's the real issue.
Thank you very much. I'll be mindful of time. Now, religion answers, on record I'm a Christian, but I encounter this question a lot. Religion answers questions of meaning, purpose, love very well. But now, what do you do as a Christian when you're confronted with evidence? And this is like an example. The other day I was at the Nairobi Museum, and I was looking at these Homo habilis, Homo erectus, evolution, as in, what do you see as a Christian? Do you just close your eyes to what you're seeing? And concerning the age of the earth, that question troubles me a lot. Age of the earth. Mm-hmm. Looking at the genealogy in the Bible, honestly, it is around 6,000, 10,000 years. Yeah. But science, like 98%, has shown that there are these billions of years. Now, what's the possibility these scientists, 98 point something, they are wrong? Thank you.
Good. Yeah. I was speaking in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia just last week, and I had the privilege of meeting Lucy there. So I also went to a museum and met one of the hominoids that you're speaking about. Now, the question of the age of the earth and you started by saying, what do you do when you're confronted by the evidence? And the answer to that question is this: there is no evidence presented that contravenes Christianity or the existence of God. No evidence contravenes that. So you don't have to be afraid of the evidence that may be presented to you. I love evidence. That's why I'm studying philosophy right now, because I want to, and all my professors are atheists and my classmates and all that. So I want to be as open-minded as I can and go to this place at the University of Georgia and go to a place where the people who teach these things and study these things are very, very serious and gifted scholars. I want to study with people like that who don't believe what I believe, but they care about the evidence that you're speaking about. But I'll tell you right now, I'm finishing up my PhD. I've been in this program for a while, and it has only strengthened my faith, not weakened my faith. So what do we do about the age of the earth and all the people who even ask whether dinosaurs existed and all that? The issue is this. I know this is a very difficult issue for many Christians to accept or to understand, because we have been told over and over again that the Bible is emphatic that the universe was created only about 6,000 years ago. We have been told that over and over again. And what they do is they say that the word used for day in the book of Genesis, the word yom, for example, that's the word used for day, can only mean a 24-hour period. But that's really not true. And there are Christians, many Christians all over the world, and has nothing to do with evolution. For example, St. Augustine, who lived in the 400s AD, long time before Darwin ever came on the scene, in his commentary on Genesis, and there are many other church fathers who had the same issue, they say that if you study the scriptures and look at what the Bible is teaching critically about the age of the earth, you're not going to be able to come up with a conclusive answer. And so we ought to be able to let scientists do whatever they can to find out and discover what is there to be discovered. And we should participate in the process even as followers of Jesus Christ. We should not be afraid of science. The founders of modern science were actually believers. They were Christian believers, and they were inspired in their search by their faith in God, because they said this. This is a historical fact. It's not disputed by anybody who understands how modern science came into existence. And they said this, that God gave us two books, the Revelation, the Bible, and also the book of nature, and that what he wanted is for us to be able to study both. And so we can really be able to let scientists find out what they can find out. We should be happy about it. We should encourage people who are Christians to go into science and do the best that they can in those fields, and we should not be afraid of the evidence. So what about the word day, this word yom? Does it always mean a 24-hour period? The answer is no. If you look at the way it's used in the book of Genesis itself, in the beginning, for example, it says, it will talk about God dividing light and darkness, and then he says the light he called day, and the darkness he called. How long was that period? The day. How many hours? Now, how many would it be if we're thinking in terms of would it be 24? Do we have any mathematicians? How many hours? How many hours would it be? This is a serious question. 12. Okay, so right there in the use of the word, we see it used in a different sense. And then if you keep reading in Genesis chapter 2, it says, in the day that the heavens and the earth were created. Now, how long is that? It encompasses the whole period, right? When the whole thing, when all creation was made, the Bible says that was a day, in the day that they were created. And that's an unspecified period of time. It's used like that in many other parts in the Bible. And then the seventh day, for example, on the seventh day, there was evening and there was morning, the first day and all that. The seventh day is left open. So we are not given those specifications. So going by the text itself, if the text said, please hear me, if the text was clear that God made this universe in 6 days, about 6,000 years ago, I would have this. What I would say. I would say, based on what we are seeing here in the world, that doesn't seem to match up. So this is a problem for my view as a Christian. That's what I would say. But I don't have to say that now, just going by the text itself. We can be able to do the investigation that we want to do and be confident in what we are studying. We don't need to be afraid of any evidence that anybody might present to us. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. I'm Nicholas, and I believe in Christ as a perfect sacrifice, stemming from his birth to active obedience in life and in death. But my question is around the virgin conception.
Yeah.
That who actually has the seed of original sin? Because if Christ was conceived by Mary, and yet Christ made it out of Mary, being a human being, as perfect, not having inherited the original sin. We know, of course, Scripture says that through one man, Adam, sin came into the world.
Yeah.
And so, is it that the original seed, if there is a seed of original sin, it is in man as the male gender? Yeah, because basically that is what it will mean. If Christ made it through Mary, and he didn't inherit the sin, and that's why it's a perfect sacrifice, then how will you explain? Is it that a woman is not having the seed of original sin?
Okay. Wow, that's a really good question. It actually has been discussed over and over again in church history. And you know how some churches handle that. They say that even Mary was sinless, the Immaculate Conception and all that. The people who go that route. But I personally don't think that we need to do that, because she calls Jesus, she cries to God and calls him her savior as well. She needed a savior as well. So is it the case that sin is passed on or carried along through the male gender. I would say that is that is not the case, but it's possible, just possible, that is if you are the result of a union between a man and a woman, which we all are, right? If that's the case, then we are completely human, and that's when we inherit that condition of sin and all that. But there are also people who do not hold, many theologians who do not hold to the position that we inherit original sin, that we are sinful in that way, even us as human beings. We inherit the tendencies, the proclivity to sin and all that, and we actualize that with our actions and all that. So that's another way of understanding it. So there are many ways to explain it without having to say it's either passed on through the female gender or the male gender and all that. I don't think we have to go that route to explain it. Now, Jesus was sinless. He never actualized he didn't have the proclivity to begin with. Although he was tempted, the Bible says, just as we are, but he never actualized the sin in his life. So he remained sinless to the end of the day. And there's another interesting question that theologians like to bounce around, is this: could Jesus have sinned? Would it have been possible for Jesus to sin? This distinction might not sound that interesting to you, but there are people who will say that he could logically have sinned, that if he tried to tell a lie, it's not that his mouth would not have opened, right? Logically, he could have done it. But because he was a perfect human being and he understood what sin is, it was not metaphysically possible for him to do it because he understood what sin is about. It's like, I'm going to give you a really crude example, and please forgive me, because some people ask the question, if we can choose against God now, what would keep us from choosing against God when we are in heaven? And at that point, we'll be able to understand exactly what sin is. Here's my really crude example. I have never had the desire to eat dog feces. Never. I've never had the desire to do that, right? Nobody has here if you're normal, right? Because we understand exactly what that is. It's not something that we are attracted to at all in any way. And when we'll get to the point where we begin to see what sin really is, and then we'll be able to do what the Bible says, to hate sin and to love God. We can never learn to love God until we learn to hate sin. The two go together. And so once we understand what sin really is, that sin wasn't part of the original plan that God had for human beings. Sin is a defect, is a corruption, and it turns God's people, whom he intended to be like him, it turns them into grotesque distortions of who they really are. So sin is a terrible distortion of humanity. You don't, just because we say to sin is human, but that's wrong. Just because we are human, it doesn't mean that we have to sin. So it's not an essential part of being human. I hope that helps somewhat.
My name is Harrison Mumia. I'm the president of Atheists in Kenya, and whose basic mission is to challenge religious faith and, of course, bring atheists in Kenya together. My question is on the meaning and purpose of life. And when you were doing the story about eradicating God and the fact that new atheists want to eradicate God, I think that is not very correct. I think there's simply no sufficient evidence to demonstrate the existence of any God or a supernatural being. Now, but the issue of why we cannot eradicate God for you came down to three things: the meaning and purpose of life, morality, the issue of right and wrong, and the intrinsic value of human rights.
Human beings.
Human rights.
The value of human beings. They have rights because
they have rights. Yes. Now, I'm not going to dwell on the last two. I'll just stick with the meaning and purpose of life because of time.
Okay.
And in your explanation, I felt that, and for many Christians, life can only have meaning when you have a God somewhere who assures you of some sort of afterlife. You know that this is not the only world that there is, and He has better things for you, maybe after you die. And to me, it looked as if it is meaningless to live a life that simply ends when you die, or after you die, that there is nothing else.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that. It's meaningless?
I'm saying it seems to me that the moment you remove God from this life and you live a life where it's only this life that you're living, that when you die, there is nothing else. It would seem to me you're telling us that would be a meaningless life. That because God doesn't exist, there is no connection between you and the supernatural, that then becomes a meaningless life. But then my question becomes, for those of you who want to go to heaven, the fact of the matter is, while there is meaning in life in the sense that you feel good that there's life after death, and somebody is trying to prepare for you a better place, there's no evidence that there is this life after death. There is nothing to show that that life exists.
Okay.
And even if it does, it would appear to me still it's not an easy destiny to achieve. Because the very God for whom you want around and you feel that He cares for you so much and wants you to live a life after death has also another place for you if you don't live by His rules. And the place is hell. So, there is nothing meaningful in living a life full of fear that if you don't live in accordance with the will of God, you're going to go to hell. There's nothing happy about that. There's nothing good about it. In fact, there's everything scary about it. To that extent, I would think that the idea of God does not sufficiently give purpose and meaning to life just because there is supposedly life after death. I would have asked many more questions, but I will respect Nelly and the fact that she wants us to keep time.
All right.
But I want to appreciate the atheists who are here and the free thinkers for coming. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to appreciate them too. It's very brave of you for you to be in. You fell into a den of Christians. Right. Now, you started by saying that it is not true that the new atheists want to eradicate religion. That's not true. The real issue is that there is no evidence for God. That's the real issue. The reason to say there is no evidence for God, that's what, first of all, that doesn't mean God doesn't exist. The lack of evidence is not the evidence of absence, right? Right? So just because even if there was no evidence, that would not prove God doesn't exist. That's number one. Number two, the reason this label, the new atheist, has been added to the word atheist is because of the agenda that they have set for themselves, which is, in their own words, to eradicate religion. Richard Dawkins is very clear on that. You can find, just Google his name and eradicate religion, you'll see that statement that he makes to that effect. Sam Harris was asked on TV once, he was asked, if you had the power to eradicate either rape or religion, which one would you eradicate? Do you know what he said? He said religion. And what you want to say is that you hope that his wife or his daughter is never in that kind of a condition of rape. that you'll be able to think about those two links in that way. So it is, the label new atheists point to that issue. And what has happened is this. The new atheists are very, very weak on argumentation, giving reasons why they think God doesn't exist. And what they're trying to do these days is to redefine atheism, to say this. All we have to do is oppose faith in God. We don't have to make any claims. We are not saying that God doesn't exist. We are saying that we don't hold any beliefs about God. Now think about that for a moment. We don't hold any beliefs about God. Now, the fact that somebody doesn't hold a belief about God, there is no logical way you can move from that claim to the claim that God doesn't exist. Logically, it doesn't work. For example, there's a team in the US called the Dodgers, a baseball team. And I'm willing to bet that maybe 90% of you here have no idea. You had never heard of that until I said it just now. But just because you do not hold any beliefs about the Dodgers, does that mean they don't exist? It doesn't mean that. Just because people don't hold beliefs about God, it doesn't mean God doesn't exist. You have to do more than that. You have to explain what you mean when you say God doesn't exist. But when you say, I don't hold the belief that God doesn't exist, you are describing a psychological condition, and it's not something that we can respond to. We don't need to respond to something like that. You don't hold the belief, fine. That doesn't mean God doesn't exist. Now you ask the question, what about following? How does it give you meaning and purpose in life when what you're invited to is a God who threatens you with hell if you don't respond to him? And how can you be happy in your life knowing that is the case? And how can you even, I would even go further than that and ask, how can you even worship a God like that? He seems very insecure that he has to threaten you with hell, and if you don't love him, he needs your love. If you don't give it to him, he throws you in hell. And I would greatly sympathize with that. And I think it's a view that many, many people hold. But I think from a biblical standpoint, it's a view that is mistaken. Because, as has been said before, the door to your heart is the lock to the door in your heart is on the inside. Only you can be able to open it. God is not threatening you with hell if you don't respond to him. He gives you the choice. If you look, Paul writing to the Thessalonians, he said this, that there is such a thing as separation from God. That's basically what hell is. It's the separation from God. We only have two choices. When confronted with the reality of God, we have only two choices. We can either accept God or reject God. And that's what there is. There's nothing in between. We speak as though we have a world that we have made for ourselves, and this is what we are fine with it, we are okay with it. And then this God, who knows nothing about us, where he's been all these years, he's coming here and telling us what we're supposed to be doing here, while we are getting along fine without him. But that is not, if God does exist, we are here because he made us, because he created us, and we are responsible to him. We choose, and we have the choice to either choose for God or choose against God. And to choose against God is to choose hell. That's basically what hell is. And now, there are caricatures and images about hell that some preachers have used to scare people. You're right, people have done that, to scare people into accepting Christ by using these images, sometimes drawn from the Bible. But those images given in the Bible, for example, a burning lake of fire and all that, those are metaphors that are used to describe absence from God. They're not meant to be taken literally. What do I mean by that? Hell is described as a place of utter darkness. How can it be a place of darkness and at the same time be a lake of fire? It can't happen. These are metaphors that are given to us to describe absence from God. And then you have God pleading with people, oh Jerusalem, how I have longed you to hold you under my wing, but you are not willing. God pleads with people over and over again to repent and to come to him. And again, there's nothing in between, just those two choices. You choose God or you choose against God. And he honors our dignity as human beings enough to give us that choice. And he honors it once we have made it. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said that in the end, there will only be two kinds of people. Those who will say to God, all right then, your will be done. And those to whom God will say, okay then, your will be done. Those are the choices that confront us as human beings.